All right, everyone. Thank you all for turning up. This is really surprising and wonderful. We weren't sure what to expect with the mid-August lecture, but we're really delighted that you guys all came out. We're also recording, so if you want to review later or tell your friends about it, we'll upload it on YouTube or something like that. I don't know most of you, so I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Nicole De Silva. I'm a new prof in the department, political science. So I've been organizing a human rights lecture series, and we're lucky enough to have Vicki Prais. She's the O'Brien Fellow in Residence at McGill, and she's visiting the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism. And she's really passionate about educating young people about human rights careers, and she's graciously decided to give this talk today to educate you guys and let you know about the opportunities internationally as well as domestically. So it'll be interesting just for you guys who are interested in human rights, interested in working abroad maybe, interested in opportunities in government, in international organizations, in regional organizations. She has such a diverse set of experiences in the field. So it's a rare combination, really. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. I'll let her take it from there.
Thank you. Apologies for the technical stuff. We were sort of moving rooms. So, as Nicole said, I'm here at the moment as a fellow in residence at McGill University. I've been here since February, and I very sadly leave next week. I'm in denial about it, but I'm leaving and moving back to the UK. And I've been working here on prisoners' rights in Canada. That wasn't my original Canada wasn't in my original focus, but my research kind of evolved into that. So the talk today really is something that I've done at universities back in the UK, and at McGill I gave the same talk in April. And it's really to kind of share my experiences and what I've kind of learned and gleaned through the years that I've been working in human rights, to share with you guys who are maybe thinking about a career in human rights. And what I will say is it's very upfront, it's very honest. I'm not kind of going to kind of sugarcoat it and say it's like the life of Amal Clooney or something like this. It's really not. And I just want to take you through, as Nicole says, the opportunities that might be available to you, etc. So we'll kind of go through that. But I hope what I say today is helpful to you, but it is not by any means gospel. You take it or leave it, what I say, but it's just, as I say, something, experiences that I've had. But by way of a starting point, I wanted to share with you sort of something of my own sort of journey, and I'm not just kind of showing you my holiday photos from Kosovo. It's actually where I was in 2004, 2005, working for the UN mission in Kosovo as initially a legal officer and then subsequently a minority rights officer. And it was a year that I was there, and it was part of my sort of human rights journey. It was a very kind of interesting experience to be out in the field, to be working with a peacekeeping mission. And the particular photos that I've put up here are very kind of relevant, because I was visiting a Serb enclave in just near Pristina, and they were celebrating a wine festival. And amidst all these sort of bombed out buildings, they were celebrating the new harvest of wine, and so hence the reason for the grapes. So I put that to you just as a starting point to say this could be part of your own human rights kind of trajectory and human rights journey as well. So just to kind of set the scene more than anything else, just to sort of say that could be something that might be of interest to you. But what we are going to kind of look at today in some detail is what is a career in human rights. So you probably all have an idea, a sense in your head of what a career in human rights might look like. But I'll sort of cover that in a bit more detail. We'll look at sort of further study, whether or not you need to go on and do a master's degree. Now, I realise I'm talking to a Canadian audience, and your system is slightly different from what we have back in the UK, but thinking about advanced study as a kind of thing. We'll look at some of the options that are available to you in terms of human rights careers, be it legal, be it research, be it campaigning or advocacy. So lots of different areas that you can go into, and I will just kind of highlight a few of the main ones for you. We'll look at international versus domestic, because your career can keep you here in Canada, or you can go far afield. The world can really be your oyster. So thinking through, what does that mean for you as a person, and on what does that mean in terms of opportunities. We'll look a little bit about the skills and qualities. What kind of person do you need to be to do this kind of work? Because I can tell you now, and quite bluntly, it's not easy work to do day to day. So what skills do you need, or what will be helpful for you, but what qualities as well? What kind of person do you need to be? A little bit also about the lifestyle. So whether you choose to work internationally or domestically, there is a lifestyle attached to working in human rights. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll look at how you get your first break. So what could you do now, here, this year, and going forward, to help you get your first break in the human rights world? And there are really easy, nice, practical things that you can be doing. So I will kind of help you and guide you in that. So that's really kind of where we'll go with the talk today. But I just wanted to kind of just talk about my own story briefly, because to say to you this, that my own sort of trajectory has been a mix of luck, timing, and networking. I've had no plan, I've had no direction at times, and it's just opportunities have just come my way. And that, I suppose, is the first takeaway for you, is that, take every opportunity that comes your way, because you don't know where it's going to lead you and who you're going to come in contact with. So grab all the opportunities that come your way, because they can be fantastic opportunities there. I've done international work, so I've worked for a small NGO called UN Watch that monitored the UN. I've worked for the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, where I was responsible for negotiating with delegations as to how they implemented the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. And then, as I mentioned there, I've had field experience working in Kosovo. Equally, I've done domestic work. I've worked for the British government as a lawyer, working on national security and terrorism cases. And most recently, until 2017, for 3 years, I was a human rights advisor to the British Foreign Office, advising on human rights issues affecting British nationals detained overseas. I've done a little bit of campaigning work with Amnesty. I cut my teeth doing immigration and asylum work, going to court representing asylum seekers and migrants in the UK who wanted to settle in the UK. And then I've done a little bit of work with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. But why I put that up there is to say to you that in every job you have stretch and you have skills building. So look for jobs which stretch you in terms of your abilities, but also look for jobs that will help you in terms of your skill set and building up the skill set that you need. So looking at what is a career in human rights, and we'll go into each of these kind of in a bit more detail. There's the classic one of course, qualifying as a lawyer and becoming what I've termed there a lawyer of value. So doing work which might be sort of public interest work, which will be sort of work which has impact for not only your client, but a number of clients in certain areas. So doing that kind of strategic litigation, if you like. And also working with vulnerable, marginalised groups. There is also the opportunity to do campaigns work. If being a lawyer doesn't appeal, don't fear, because there's other options. So what I've put there, fighting the good fight. So finding a cause that touches you and speaks to you, and campaigning on that issue. So there's that option as well. There's also the option to do research and policy work, so looking at particular policies that are coming out from the government, critiquing those and challenging those, etc. So, and again, we'll look at those in a bit of detail. Those are the three big ones, but also there's a whole load of other areas that you could go into. There's fundraising work, there's human rights education work, there's communications, there's academia. So, whilst it is a saturated market and there are lots of people trying to break in, there are equally lots of entry points into the sector. So that's kind of to encourage you to say, don't despair. There are lots of ways in to the human rights sector there. So thinking about whether or not you need to do an advanced degree, and when I talk about an advanced degree, I'm talking about a master's degree principally there. Now, I obviously know that your Canadian system is slightly different there, but myself, I did a law degree, and then I did a master's in human rights and civil liberties. We were 4 people on the course, which kind of gives you an idea of how long ago I did it. But now, back in the UK, on a master's program, you get over 100 students on a human rights type master's. So it kind of gives you a sense of what the demand is for these kind of courses. I think I should say that increasingly now we're seeing in this market, in the human rights market, that employers do want an advanced degree. Not in human rights or international relations or public law with a human rights angle, but if you look at job adverts, they will often ask for an advanced degree there. So it is sought after there. But I know that doing a master's degree comes with, that it's financially quite restricted. It can be very expensive to do a master's degree, so there are sort of issues around that. But if you are thinking about it, then looking at masters in laws with a human rights angle to it, or a development angle to it, or international humanitarian law, there are lots of different combinations of master's degrees that you can do. And also lots of good schools that you can go to. I know mainly the ones in the UK and in Europe. I'm not so au fait with the ones here in North America. But there are lots of really good schools that do masters in human rights, public law, public international law, this kind of area. So I do think there is value in doing a master's and thinking about it as an option for you. But also, what I would say is kind of if there are jobs that interest you, sort of look at them and see what they're asking for as well. So kind of, tailoring that as well there. But if there are particular schools that you're interested in Europe, I can maybe try and advise you individually there. So going back to the individual kind of jobs that I was talking about, or sort of areas, becoming a lawyer and becoming a lawyer of value. So qualifying as a lawyer is one way that you can make a difference in terms of human rights work. You are at the sharp end. You are working with clients, defending them, helping them, advocating on behalf of them. And it's a very sort of meaty sort of part of human rights work there. Now, it is a commitment of time and money. I know that it's difficult to secure articles. Certainly back in the UK, there's a lot of competition to get a training contract, as we call it. But I know here you do a shorter period of training. In the UK it's 2 years, but it's shorter here. But again, from my own perspective, qualifying as a lawyer helped me get a lot of the jobs that I got. And I think I wouldn't have got a lot of the jobs had I not been a qualified lawyer. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts there. The work itself is intellectually very rigorous. It's demanding work as it goes. But what you do is you pick up fundamental lawyering skills. So you pick up forensic analytical skills, you pick up negotiation skills, advocacy skills, writing skills. All of these are useful in a human rights career and actually kind of critical for a human rights career there. So qualifying as a lawyer can kind of set you off in the right direction. But as I said, it's not the only avenue there. In terms of the nature of the work, well, as I say, becoming a lawyer of value, you can be working with marginalised groups. So working with asylum seekers and refugees. So for 6.5 years, as I said, I was working day in, day out with that community, representing them before courts and trying to get them asylum. Or it could be working with prisoners or detainees. So those who don't have a voice or need your advice and help, that's the kind of community that you could be working with there. And what you could be doing is challenging unfair government policies and saying this policy is wrong, and it's wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons. So, undertaking public interest litigation, for want of a better word, and trying to change government policy on a particular issue. And as I said there, sort of, what you need is, as a person, is you need to have good judgment. You need to have, good analytical skills. Can you sort of look at a problem, analyse it, find solutions for that particular case, but also having a degree of creativity as well, because you'll have to think outside the box as a lawyer and think of ways to kind of challenge cases. And I've put here in brackets government lawyer, because I did a stint as a government lawyer for 4.5 years. And to my mind, if you want to be challenging government, the best way is to know how government works. So doing some time within government and actually seeing how policy is made in government is pretty valuable to you as a human rights professional. If you know what drives government, what drives policy, you know, ministers' interests and things like that, then that will better equip you to challenge government and to you know, if there are policies that are wrong, you will have that insight. So what I would say is don't discount a period of time as a government lawyer, because it can kind of give you a very helpful skill set and insight that you wouldn't ordinarily have. So the legal route is one route, and I'm sort of advocating that because that's where I came from, but as I say, it's not the only avenue for you guys at all. If you are more inclined to research and to sort of looking at particular issues, countries, themes, then perhaps becoming a researcher or going down the research route within the human rights world might be more of your thing there. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you would be researching and monitoring and documenting human rights abuses in a particular country or region, or as I say, it could be a thematic issue as well, cutting across a lot of countries there. The work itself involves report writing, drafting briefing papers, drafting submission to international bodies potentially. So really kind of meaty, interesting work there. So it's the kind of thing that you would see Human Rights Watch producing a report on something going on in Sudan or wherever it may be. So it's that kind of work there. As a country-based researcher, you would need to have good knowledge of the country that you're working in. You need to know your country inside out, not only the human rights issues, but everything else besides. And you need to kind of get under the skin of that particular country. What qualifications you need? Well, you don't need to necessarily come from a human rights background per se. A research background, a social research background, I think would set you up well for work as a researcher there, or sort of an understanding of how to collect and analyse information, basically, both qualitative and quantitative information, so that could be of value there. But also I was looking this morning at sort of jobs as researchers, and Human Rights Watch had a job in Lebanon, and they were asking for a degree in international relations, regional studies, journalism, law. So, you know, it can cover lots of different backgrounds, not necessarily only law. But as I say, it's the ability to identify and to research and to analyse information, to distill it into a comprehensible report, which is going to go out to the world at large. So there's lots of skill set there. It could involve developing advocacy strategies. So how would you use that report in an advocacy strategy on campaigning with the government? So if that's more your bag, if that's more where you see yourself, then absolutely there's an avenue there for you to go. But if that's really doesn't take your fancy, and you want to kind of really dig down into policy, into a government policy, then perhaps a role as a policy officer. And often they're kind of policy advocacy officers is how, well, certainly back in the UK, how they are advertised, but there might be similar terms here. So the policy work, to my mind, is a really interesting sort of part of the human rights arena, of human rights careers that you could go into there. Typically, a policy officer will focus on one particular issue. So it might be privacy, it might be immigration, it might be police, or access to justice. So they'll look at one particular issue and how is the government sort of leading on the policy for that particular issue. And what you, as a policy officer, are doing is to try and influence and bring about change in government policy, to critique government policy, and to look at sort of what government is doing on a particular issue. So in a day-to-day, work, it would be responding to government consultations. So if the government is thinking about a particular policy, they'll kind of issue a government consultation, and organisations can respond to those. It might be drafting amendments to government briefings, so to government bills. So it might be sort of saying, well, actually, this bit of the law is wholly wrong. It's not human rights compliant for this reasons, X, Y, and Z. So it's an academic pursuit. It's looking at the kind of fine letter of policy and law and bills, and seeing sort of, what works, what doesn't work. What you need to have as a skill set is kind of the ability to exercise political judgment, to know a little about parliamentary and legislative processes. So how does government work, and knowing where to kind of dive in. I suppose at what point in the process your intervention would be helpful. So it might be good fit for a kind of black letter lawyer, or somebody who likes to find detail of legislation and policy, etc. there. It is a pressurized area because there will be deadlines to meet for these policy consultations, these government consultations. So I suppose, can you work under pressure? You'll only have a certain amount of time to draft a policy response from your organisation, from the NGO. So, knowing that you can work under pressure and produce high quality work in that time there. And also the ability to represent your organisation with policymakers and people in government, because you will be lobbying them, meeting with them, and sort of putting forward your organisation's point of view or position. So kind of, relationship management, I suppose I would term that. But a really, really interesting area to be in if a particular issue appeals to you in terms of the human rights world. The final one that I was going to talk about sort of globally is the campaigns and advocacy routes, so which is kind of aligned to policy, but more sort of proactive doing this kind of thing there. So if you see yourself more as a campaigner, taking an issue and really getting action and traction on it, then perhaps this is more of an area that you might be interested in. It's usually issues-based, so you would be looking at a particular human rights issue or concern. And it's thinking about campaigns, so generating new ideas, being creative, thinking about tactics for a campaign. How can you build a campaign and build momentum around a particular campaign? So as a skill set, I would suggest that you would need to be a kind of creative, strategic thinker, thinking long-term, medium-term. What do you want your campaign to look like? What are your asks? What do you want, government to do? It can also be a public-facing role as well, because you're trying to kind of garner support from the public. So how are you at talking to the public about this particular issue? And distilling down perhaps a complex human rights issue to members of the public who might not know about it. So, are you able to kind of translate that complex issue into something a little bit more accessible there? Very often campaigning work now we know is aligned to social media, so having a social media kind of knowledge, a media savvy, for want of a better word, thinking about e-campaigns and how do we use social media for the campaigns there. So having those good solid technical skills as well would help in terms of this work as well. And what I should finally say about the advocacy work is it can either be domestic, so it could be something here in Canada, which you could work on. There are many, many human rights issues that you could work on domestically, or it could take you internationally as well. You could go overseas and work on international issues, or it could span the both. So you could have a human rights issue here in Canada, but has got an international angle. So you're lobbying, you're doing work at the UN, you're doing work at the Council of Europe, or wherever it may be. So there is kind of possibility that it could span both. But it's an interesting area of work to be in, or human rights work, in terms of the opportunities that are available to you. So a little bit more about sort of particular organisations that you could look to work for. And I've just kind of highlighted the intergovernmental organisations, so the UN, the Council of Europe, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. These are the ones that I'm talking about, and also national human rights institutions. So here you have the Canadian Human Rights Commissions, and then all the sort of state human rights commissions as well. So the work that these organisations do, the intergovernmental organisations, it's hugely interesting. It's broad, it's wide in terms of the human rights issues that they cover, so there's huge breadth there, not only in the UN, but also the kind of wider UN family, so UN High Commissioner for Refugees, for example, or UNICEF dealing with children. So the work has both a sort of an international focus, or it could have a regional focus as well. In terms of skill set, having languages really helps. It makes you more portable. English and French, or any other UN working languages, is really helpful. In terms of the benefits and perks, well, we know that the UN has got a lot of benefits attached to it. That it is a tax-free salary, and then if you have partner family, that they get benefits as well. So there is that attraction as well. But on the downside, and having worked for the UN myself in Kosovo there, it's bureaucratic, it's slow, it's cumbersome. There are fiefdoms, it's politicised. So you don't need to go very far to scratch beneath the surface to see it's an imperfect organisation in many ways. Also sort of thinking about where you want to be in these international organisations, whether you want to work in the field, so whether you want to kind of get out there, get your feet on the ground, in the field, in a peacekeeping mission it might be, or another organisation with the UN, or do you want to be in headquarters? Do you want to be sitting in your comfortable office in Geneva or New York, or wherever it may be? So, if you're in the field, you'll get a real sense of the kind of human rights challenges on the ground. You'll meet the stakeholders, you'll meet the beneficiaries. But there are privations of working in the field, and I'll come on to that shortly there. And the final sort of thing that I wanted to kind of mention to you is about ways in, because particularly the UN seems like a very, very hard nut to crack. It just seems this kind of mythical thing that nobody can get near. And I just want to tell you that there are ways in, that there are absolutely ways that you can get in. There are internships, of course, that you can do, and perhaps that's maybe one of the easier ways to get your foot in the door of not only the UN, but other international intergovernmental organisations as well. But they are not paid. So this is a quid pro quo that you get your foot in the door, but unfortunately they're not paid there. There are entry-level positions as well, so I'll come on to this again, but there are junior professional programs that you can do as well, and certain governments sponsor them, so Canada sponsors the JPO program, so there are ways in that you can get through that. Okay, let's go on. And then there are full-time positions as well, so what are called P positions. And those range from P1 up to P5. Just to give you a sense, P2 is a junior professional position for somebody with 2 years experience. P3, P4 is mid-career, and then D1, D2 is somebody with 15 to 20 years experience. There are also rosters that you can get onto. So I've just gone through a recruitment now with the UN. 3 rounds later, I'm sitting on a roster with the UN to work as a judicial affairs officer in peacekeeping missions or in headquarters. But these are long processes. They take a long time to kind of go through. But that said, don't dismiss it. It could be a very interesting career path, but it's just finding that way in and getting your foot in the door. Alternatively, there is national human rights institutions. So thinking here in Canada, for example, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, or the Ontario Human Rights Commission, or Nova Scotia. So these bodies are really interesting bodies because they're looking at human rights issues here domestically, but they've also got a foot in the door internationally as well, because they may be responsible for reporting to international bodies about how Canada's doing in terms of its human rights record and compliance. So they also they do some kind of litigation and advocacy work. So thinking about those as an option is a good thing to do. But again, I think jobs are probably few and far between. There, I don't think I met with people at the Canadian Human Rights Commission. I don't think they've got a huge, big legal team there. But I just mention it as a potential option for you. We're back in again. So yeah, just thinking about IGOs and national human rights institutions as a possible option. I wanted to kind of touch upon coming into human rights from somewhere else. And I'm sort of talking about it mainly if you kind of come from the corporate world. So say you've qualified as a lawyer, you've done your sort of articles in a big city firm, and you've done that corporate side, but really you want to do human rights work. Can you do human rights work? Well, the answer is absolutely you can. And I think that your skill set that you bring from that world is eminently transferable in terms of what you can bring there. All of the skills that I put up there, negotiation, advocacy, project management, the basic lawyering skills, are things that you can bring from the corporate world into the NGO world there. As lawyers, we need to find solutions and problems. As human rights professionals, we're also looking for solutions to problems. So, there's a lot of kind of symbiosis between the corporate world, let's say, and coming into the human rights world. And in fact, some of the areas that you might work on in the corporate world, so for example, business and commercial work, might lend itself nicely to human rights work. So business and human rights work, there's lots of stuff happening there. Tech and media, you might feel drawn to working on freedom of expression, freedom of information, this kind of area there. And also don't discount the pro bono work that you might do during your time as in articles, certainly in big city law firms back in the UK. All these big firms want to be seen to be doing good things, so they have corporate social responsibility projects where their lawyers will give time to pro bono projects. So that can all help build you up as a human rights kind of professional if you're looking to move in at a later stage. So yeah, think about that, or don't be disheartened if you want to go down the commercial route initially. So a little bit about sort of the international versus the domestic, because your career can span both, and really, suffice to say, the world can be your oyster if you so choose. Someone told me when I was kind of starting out, they said field experience is really valuable. So that's why I kind of took myself out to Kosovo for the year and just kind of got stuck in. And it is regarded well by employers because it shows that you put your money where your mouth is and you go out to the field and you do that work. So it does give you frontline experience, but it can be tough, and I'll mention why later. But there are various ways that you can do international work. You could work for an NGO, so a small non-governmental organisation, getting stuck into a particular issue, getting grassroots experience with a particular NGO. They're small often in terms of budget and personnel, but they might give you quite a lot of responsibility in turn. So they might give you a project to work on, they might sort of throw quite a lot at you. So that might be a way in for you in terms of international work. Or you might want to try and work in a peacekeeping mission with the UN. They have human rights positions in peacekeeping missions. They have jobs as human rights officers or judicial affairs officers or rule of law officers, as they're also known as well. But having worked on a peacekeeping mission, I can say that it's very hard to work on a peacekeeping mission, and that you need to be robust both physically and emotionally. And you will get hardship missions where you are in a container, where you are in a compound, where you don't have creature comforts, where you have limited internet, limited freedom of movement. So these are things to take into account when you're thinking about, where do I want my career to take me? Working in a mission can be like being in a goldfish bowl. everybody knows everyone else's business and who's going out with who and all of this kind of thing, so it can be claustrophobic, to say the least. You will very often work and socialise with the same people. And there is a very high use of drugs and alcohol on mission. It's a way of coping. It's a way of people kind of dealing with the difficult lifestyle. So those are kind of things to think about in terms of the international aspect, but equally you might want to be at home here in Canada doing human rights work. So, there are opportunities here, but more limited, of course, in terms of what's on offer, I'd say. Or you might want to think about going to one of the human rights hubs, London, Geneva, New York, where there are lots of NGOs and lots of kind of human rights activity, but all these cities are expensive places to live. So, there are issues to sort of think about there. So, thinking about you as a person, what skills and qualities do you need to kind of do this kind of work? And this is where I think I will be, the most brutally honest that I can be. So I know it sounds kind of obvious to say, but you need to be motivated and committed to this work, to social justice, human rights work, because you are going to be dealing with really tough, hard, difficult stuff. You're going to be dealing with survivors of torture. You're going to be dealing with people who are in prison, who are potentially subject to the death penalty, people who have been through very, very difficult experiences, and you might be coming in contact with them as their lawyer, campaigning on their behalf. So you really need to be committed to this work because it's going to affect you deeply. It is going to affect you there. On a more practical level, as I've mentioned before, having languages really helps. And I mentioned a couple of the in-demand languages, and that was just talking to somebody who was working for the International Commission of the Red Cross. Those are the languages that they identified as being kind of in-demand languages. But, French, Spanish, I worked at the Council of Europe, I needed to work in French and English, so, it makes you much more kind of appealing. Having tenacity, and I say that in two senses. I say that firstly in the sense of tenacity in the job search, because you're going to get rejections, you're going to get disappointed, you're not going to get that job that you so want, that you so would love to have. So you need to be tenacious, you need to kind of not let it kind of get to you. So that respect. But also you need to be tenacious in terms of the nature of the work that you're doing, because you're going to be confronting governments and saying to them, what you're doing is wrong. You're not complying with human rights there. So, you're going to need to have that wherewithal to kind of face off governments and authorities in terms of the work that you are doing there. But also tenacious because you might only have small wins in your campaign. So we're not going to be able to eradicate torture in Pakistan. That's a huge, big sort of thing. But you might get a small win. You might get one parliamentarian who supports a bill to do with torture. So, you have to be sort of tenacious in that respect. Robust and resilient, and I alluded to that before there. Particularly this goes to sort of international work, but also I think, domestic as well if you're dealing with, difficult issues here. As I said there, international mission life is hard, living in the containers, power blackouts, tropical diseases, isolated duty stations. With the UN you have family and non-family duty stations, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to bring your family with you. You're away from home and family and friends, etc. So think about you as a person and whether you can cope with that, and if you can, for how long can you cope with that as well? So short bursts, or can you endure it for some time? And I say it not to scare you or not to worry, but just telling you from what I've done myself and what I've experienced myself. But amongst all that, it's important to have positivity and a sense of humour, because you are, as I say, going to be dealing with the very dark side of life. So keeping that innate positivity is really important. It keeps you going, and you need to have that. And then being flexible and adaptable. And I say that in two senses. I say that firstly in the job search, so perhaps you might not get exactly what you want, so being flexible and a bit adaptable in terms of perhaps what you're looking for there as a human rights professional, but also when you're on the ground doing something, the situation might change very quickly and you would have to kind of be adaptable and flexible and go with it. So just knowing that you've got that flex in terms of your personality. So something about the lifestyle, and you've probably kind of gleaned from what I said there, but it's not for everybody. It can be, as I said, very emotionally and physically demanding. Job security, in short, there is none. It's a very uncertain sector. There's little job security. So again, just telling you about myself, I don't have a job at the moment. I finished a big job, as I said, in September 2017, came out here and did my 5-6 months in Canada. I now have to job hunt. I don't know what I'm doing when I go back to the UK next week. I have some interviews lined up, but I don't have a job. So it's a very uncertain kind of lifestyle and future, you know, that you're looking at. But again, if you can kind of cope with that, then, you know, it's an area that I think you could work in there. But if you want stability, if you're the kind of person that you know every month you want your paycheck coming in and you've got all those kind of commitments, I just put it out there, it's not a certain career. And also, contracts are short. So, I mean, I had a 3-year contract with the Foreign Office. That was my longest job, 3 years. Others have been maternity leave covers for a year here, a year there. So, it's something to think about. It's dangerous as well. And I put up a picture here of Thor Hessler. So I knew him a little in Kosovo, not very well, but I knew him in a wider circle. He went to Afghanistan and he was killed in Afghanistan. He was murdered by the Taliban. So this work comes with risks. So, you know, just to make you aware that it's a sort of a dangerous job, it can be. Switching off from the work is not always easy, so it's very difficult, you know, to close the door at the end of the day and to switch off entirely. And I say that from very, very personal experience. As I said, I was a human rights advisor to the British government, to the Foreign Office, advising on British nationals who were detained overseas. I could still remember to this moment the hunger striker that I had in Algeria who died on me. And, you know, I keep thinking, what could I have done more to help him, to save him? But so it's very difficult to switch off from this work, and it will affect you, or it can affect you profoundly, which is why I said to go on to talk about burnout and self-care. And these are critical things that you need to kind of be aware of in this sector, that many human rights professionals simply burn out, that, you know, the work is just too much for them, and there have been 2 suicides in Amnesty in the past 3 or 4 months, which has been really quite devastating in terms of this sector. So it's important that you are strong and that you're healthy and that balanced, you know, to do this work, and that you have a good support network around you, friends and family, you know, because the work can be all-encompassing and hard going. And then family considerations, and I say that more for the kind of international work in terms of the UN, that they have family and non-family duty stations. So you might be going to Iraq, you can't really bring your family with you. In Kosovo, I think it was a family duty station, so because it was deemed to be a fairly sort of safe peacekeeping mission. So think about your own personal situation and whether you could bring, you know, how you would cope without your loved ones around you. The salary, and this is an issue. You know, we need to earn money to put bread on the table, so it won't necessarily make you rich working in this sector. Certainly, if you're working for international organisations, then yes, it's a good salary and it's tax-free and there are all the perks and benefits that you get with it. But it's certainly, your earning potential is not the same as if you were in the commercial sector there. So think about that. I did try to find some domestic roles this morning in Canada, but I wasn't able to find anything. I'm sure there are positions, but I wasn't able to sort of see anything to kind of give you an idea of salary here. So just to kind of finish up really, is how do you go about sort of getting your first break there in the human rights sector? Well, volunteering and internship opportunities is always a good place to start. Law clinics, charities, paralegal work, showing that you're committed, showing that you're engaged in the sector, in a particular issue there, and looking for those opportunities as early as possible. So in your first year, first summer, or as early as possible there. You might want to think about something like UN Volunteers, which is a scheme run by the UN. They mobilize volunteers to work in peacekeeping missions, and they have human rights positions there. You have to be 25 years old. You need 2 years of relevant working experience. You do get a stipend, so you don't get a salary per se, but you get a stipend, which keeps you going there. So be creative and think about, you know, what are the upcoming human rights issues of the moment where you could add value. And here at Concordia, I don't know, there might be opportunities here in Concordia that are open to you in terms of human rights work and opportunities. So in terms of kind of my top tips, and this is not gospel, this is just what I would suggest, thinking about what is your passion, what's your mission, what motivates you. Is it children's rights? Is it women's rights? Is it prisoners? You know, what area within the human rights world kind of really excites you? Because it's a huge area and you can't be a specialist in everything. Start backwards. So think about kind of where you want to be, and then think about how you might get there. So that was some advice that was given to me. Think about where you want to be in 5 years and how do you get there. Get yourself noticed. So start getting yourself in print. Become a bit of a mini expert in your area. So start blogging, start sort of, you know, it doesn't need to be a tome for the human right, you know, for the Harvard Law Journal. It can just be a small blog for a particular site, but start to kind of show that you've got a bit of an expertise in that particular human rights area. I know it sounds trite, but it's true. Network and talk to everyone, because you never know what doors they may open for you. So, you know, every opportunity can be something valuable. Going to lectures, so if there's a particular issue that you're passionate about, go to lectures there, talk to the people who are engaged in that issue, get yourself known to them. You know, it's all very valuable there, and it's all sort of profile raising. And then sort of soft skill up, so build up those skills that I was talking about in terms of research, communications, project management, grant writing, media skills, all of these kind of really tangible skills that you can kind of present on your resume and say, look, I know how to do a WordPress website, I know how to do et cetera, there. These are all really valuable and very important there. The final thing I was just going to talk about briefly was in Europe, the Council of Europe runs traineeship programs for member states, but also Canada has observer status. So I think, and it's a question mark, but I think you might be eligible to apply for these traineeships as well. And the work is interesting in terms of the substance, but it is unfortunately unpaid. But it gets you to Strasbourg, it gets you working in an international organisation, meeting people, networking, and so it might be worth thinking about. And also if you've got the French and English. And then, as I mentioned there, the Junior Professional Officer Programme, which is sort of sponsored by particular governments. So the Canadian government is part of the JPO programme. And they usually place people within the UN at P1 and P2 level, so those are the lowest level entry grades, as I said there. And you would find out more about that from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website here in Canada. But I think they are very, very competitive in terms of numbers of people. But again, it's something to think about, the JPO programme. So I've spoken for a lot. I really hope that I haven't put you off a career in human rights. I've, as I said, tried to be very open honest and to tell you, the experiences that I've had, just to sort of set you up for your career. So I can take questions now, or also my website, you can email me on my website here, and it gets to me directly there. And that's for, if you want bespoke advice, I can offer that too. So.
All right, so let's do some questions and answers. And there's a lot there. It's a very rich talk. And from my experience on the research side of things, and briefly working in different human rights careers, I can say that this is spot on. Like, this advice is really, I would agree with everything you said. So it isn't all, all bright and happy and good news, but this is a kind of reality check, and you're going in informed and prepared. So I'm really glad you kind of went there with this talk, because you need to be prepared for these kinds of things. So any questions, clarifications, please feel free. Yeah.
Thank you so much for going. So my question, I have two. The first one is whether there's some way to appraise in advance like the level of riskiness of a certain position. So you mentioned field work. I'm interested in other kinds of work, but I'm wondering, is it always risky? Is it always a paramilitary aspect to it? Do you always have to speak the same language? The second question is, do you know how people can get their foot in the door with the International Criminal Court?
Wow, okay. So, working backwards, the International Criminal Court, I've never had any engagement with the ICC.
I can answer if you want.
Yeah,
so I study the ICC, I've done field work there. From a researcher perspective, I've done interviews with the judges and the court officials and monitored how they hire and all that kind of thing. So very specific question, but maybe others are interested as well. It's very difficult as a Canadian, basically. So you might be familiar with the court. It has this kind of focus on developing countries, especially African countries. So lately they've really tried to ramp up the African staff and staff from developing countries. So at kind of entry-level positions, they and paid internship kind of scenarios, they target developing countries. That's not to say that you can't get there, but it might just be a sort of indirect route. But there is an ICC jobs Twitter account that you might want to follow. I found that to be the best source of information, so you can check that out.
And your first question was around the riskiness of certain positions. Is that in the field particularly that you're talking about?
I am interested in the riskiness of field work, but also you can comment also on non-field work.
Yeah. So are you talking sort of danger-wise, or just the sort of the nature of the job there? Kind of a little bit both. So I think it's worth, if you can talk to the current incumbent in the job and sort of get a sense from them as to what might be the risks and in terms of that job there, or trying to sort of get a sense around the organisation, trying to sort of find anybody in that organisation that you could talk to about it. A bit difficult to sort of
Can
say.
I just chime in? So there's different countries in the world. I mean, there's kind of a talk of the shrinking space for human rights advocacy and NGOs and that sort of thing. So you might want to look into the particular country and how their government or how groups within the country respond to foreign actors in the human rights field in that country, because there can be variation there. So there might be, a peacekeeping situation where obviously the risk is higher. It might be a fairly stable country, but there might be day-to-day crime, targeting foreigners or something like that. So there's different kinds of risks when you're in the field, and it kind of goes with the position. If we're talking about field in general, you could have a desk-based job in an office in a different country. So that's a kind of safer scenario, but you're still kind of subject to living in that different scenario. So there's a lot of variation there, and you just kind of have to look at the particular position, and as she said, kind of look at the organization. They could advise you.
And they would, if they're sending people out in their name, you would hope that they would do some kind of risk assessment before they send you out to kind of working in, a pretty sort of hairy situation there, because they have a duty of care to their employees at the end of the day. So they, they don't want to sort of send their employees out. And so, when I was with the UN in Kosovo, there, they had that in place for their staff there. But also kind of that point about how NGOs are looked at. For example, Ethiopia, they had laws where civil society was hugely kind of restricted, and their activities and sort of limited there. So reading around exactly what's happening in that space is invaluable, I think. So
I think we have a question there.
Hello.
Do you have any advice based on personal experience or perhaps that of your colleagues for women wanting to become mothers but also doing human rights work?
It's I think you'd have to kind of juggle it, I think, in terms of how you do it. It's not impossible by any means there. I suppose it's a case of knowing your limitations and what you can do, where you might go in terms of the work. As I said there are some places that are non-family duty stations, so you would not necessarily be able to bring an infant or child with you. In my immediate circle of kind of human rights peers, I don't know women who are mothers, so I can't speak from their knowledge and experience there. But I think doing the field work could be challenging. If I'm honest, I think it could be difficult, particularly if it's a non-family station. I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, I would
thoughts.
agree. So from my experience, it's some, especially the kind of bigger organizations like regional organizations or international organizations or the sort of bigger human rights employers can afford to sort of give people relocation of their family and put their children in school or something like that. But then you're always going to encounter this kind of two-body problem, assuming you're not a single parent. So your spouse or your partner will also have to find a job. And I tend to work in Arusha, Tanzania. That's always been an issue in the community there because it's just a small town. It has this cluster of human rights institutions, and people like to work there, but their spouses or their partners can't get jobs. So you might target bigger hubs like Geneva or London, as she said, where there's kind of more diverse career opportunities. And it's not easy. I mean, this happens across many sectors. It's not just human rights. So academia is like that. So.
Can you choose at first a career in the field and then go back to headquarters, or when you choose a path?
Yeah, no, I don't think that the two are kind of separate and distinct, actually. And I mean, you can, I think if you have field experience, that can only be a good thing. You can bring that to headquarters because, you've been out there in the field, dealing with the paramilitary organisation or the NGO or whatever, and stakeholders and things. So you can bring that knowledge and experience back to headquarters. The headquarters are often sort of a little bit distant from what's going on the ground, I think, sometimes. So I don't think the two are inherently sort of mutually exclusive. Yeah.
Alright, so speaking of, what is like the best skill you learn on the field that was useful for the people you report to?
The best skill.
Yeah, what was the most valuable thing you learned and people can use
When you're working in the field.
Yeah.
I think it's exposure to sort of lots of different stakeholders and organisations. So you might be working with NGOs who've got a particular interest. You might be working with other international organisations. So if I give you a working example, so when I was in Kosovo, I was a minority rights officer. We were looking to see how the Roma were being treated in the north of Kosovo. They were living in contaminated camps, and there was lead poisoning. So we were having meetings with NGOs there, with UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, and other organisations. So that sort of stakeholder work is you learn in the field as well. I think it's really valuable.
I'm really interested.
Oh,
Sorry.
another two people now.
Earlier you talked about possibilities of family field work and non-family field work. I just wanted to know what's the difference between both and what makes a specific opportunity more likely to be a family work opportunity than the other.
So it's to do with danger, basically. So the UN will assess the level of danger of a particular mission, and then we'll decide whether or not that is a family duty station or a non-family duty station. So you're looking at Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, DRC. These would be non-family duty stations. As I say, I think Kosovo was a family duty station, so they'll look at sort of the level of danger as well. I think that's the principal thing. And you will, if you're working in a non-family duty station, you'll get hazard pay as well. So for being there basically. So, but the UN has got its own criteria that it will look at. But I think it's safety and security would be the most important. You have a question?
Yeah. I've been looking into schools in the UK just because I really want to study there.
Okay.
So I was wondering what schools, because you're talking about how you know like some of the best schools.
Yeah. Well, Essex University has got a human rights centre which is second to none, and there's a little bit of an Essex University mafia all around the human rights world. A lot of people from that human rights centre are now working in human rights organisations. So. And they get sort of special rapporteurs coming to talk there and part of the faculty. And they also do a very nice complement of human rights masters. So if, for example, you're interested in international humanitarian law, they've got an IHL program, and they've got development studies, I think, one. So that's very good. And then you've got ones in London like LSE and SOAS, London School of Economics and SOAS. But I can speak to you kind of one-to-one on that, so I can give you
I
some
can as
advice.
well, because I studied at Oxford in the UK. That's where I did my grad school. So as a Canadian going to the UK, it's all about money, right? So it's all about funding for it. So that's the trick with the UK.
Yeah. And as international students, they will charge through the nose.
Yeah.
This is how they make their money. It's
But that's for everywhere. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not everywhere, actually. In continental Europe, in the Netherlands, and Germany. So Netherlands and Germany, they have English-speaking degrees, so they don't charge tuition
No, they
fees. So that's a good alternative.
And there are good schools there, definitely. Hello. Someone at the back.
Hi. So kind of on the same topic, I've been advised a lot to go into the poli-sci stream, yet I have a strong interest for international law. And I was just wondering if once you get into the field, are you kind of tied down to whatever you major in, or is it flexible enough to go from one area to the other?
I might actually invite you to answer
So,
it's a slightly different
yeah, I would say that, so I am trained in political science, and so I would say that if you're willing to put in the extra years of schooling that a law degree requires, I think it's an advantage personally, because often I find lawyers are hired to, it's sort of like political science or law, but then you also can do way more jobs as a lawyer in the human rights field, I feel. So I would advise you, if you're, that have the finances and the time and the interest to do a law degree. You're not going to be studying international law throughout your law degree, so you have to do torts and all that, tax law.
Have you met people who study law in your field that study law right away instead of doing a bachelor's first and have still been successful enough to work in the law?
We have a different system so I did an undergraduate law degree. So I didn't do a sort of something different. I mean, I went straight into law as an undergraduate degree. I did my year at law school and then qualified as a lawyer. So
it's not possible here.
It's a different system that you have to do that as a second degree, right?
Yeah.
Law,
So then you're looking at undergraduate, law degree, master's in law, PhD in law potentially. So it's, how far you want to go. But probably just, undergrad in law would be enough probably to get your foot in the door.
I just wanted to clarify, you talked about having an advanced law degree. I wanted to ask if in Canada having just a JD would count as an advanced law degree?
It's the beginner. It's the lowest law degree. So if you want to specialize in an area of law, you do a master's. And then there's also these kind of hybrid programs that have been developed recently where you do a JD and then an MA. So you can do a JD and an MA in international relations, let's say. So that kind of combination would be interesting for an employer, I think. And that kind of saves you time as well, and kind of diversifies your skill set. You say, I can do political science and I can do law. So I don't know if you have ever encountered that kind of profile, but
I don't think, I mean, everyone I know in the world, in the human rights world, has necessarily studied law, but a lot have, and as I said there at the start of my talk, it does open up a lot of opportunities for you in terms of jobs and positions out there.
I was wondering if I'm doing a JD right now, if at the end of my degree, if I go on into something like, if I can't get my foot in the door for international, do something like journalism, would that help me get?
As I said there was a job that I saw this morning with Human Rights Watch. They a researcher for Lebanon, on Lebanon, and one of the degrees that they mentioned was journalism, international relations, law. So you know, it doesn't have to be law. It's not law or anything, but
yeah, I think it's like a combination of skill sets, right? So what you said about languages, I just want to underline. Like, if you want to work in international human rights, work on your languages, because that will set you apart from people who have been studying just, you know, piling up their degrees, and you can actually function in these spaces and like have a value added to a team, let's say. So you could just learn a language and then hit the job market, like some language that would be useful in a human rights context, and then hit the job market, and you might get your foot in the door that way as opposed to doing another degree. So.
okay.
Have you ever worked with people from the business field, and how do they adapt in this environment?
Have I worked with people from the business field who were in business before?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. Not off the top of my head. I can't think of people how they did it. But I think, like I said there, I think that transfer does happen. People, you know, they. Actually, no, I do know somebody who now works for a death penalty organisation in the UK, and they qualified in a big city law firm in the UK. They did their 2-year traineeship, articles, and now they're sort of doing campaigning work on death penalty cases and things. So, yeah, it happens. It does definitely happen.
From my experience, big corporations are tending to have foundations where they do kind of development work or humanitarian response or human rights work. And so sometimes there can be crossover.
Okay.
But this is quite high level people that become the CEO of the foundation, that kind of thing. But then there's also, I worked for a summer in political risk analysis with Export Development Canada. So that's a kind of career where you don't think, oh, this is a human rights career. But I ended up doing human rights analysis for different countries that Export Development Canada was doing export financing in. So before they granted export financing for a Canadian corporation, they would do a human rights analysis to see if it was safe to invest there. So there's weird intersections with the corporate world, and you might find them. So these things like, you know, Canada doesn't have much human rights jobs. You might have to like look at them differently and look for different kind of buzzwords and terminology, and you might end up working in a human rights area in the end. You probably have a better view than I am.
Maybe.
Sure.
Well, you can imagine that we are not here to find a job
Right.
in human rights, since we are both retired faculty from this department. But I'm very glad to see that surprised that about 90% of the people who are interested in human rights are women. I don't know how to.
Well, that's.
How to explain
Why
that.
not? Why not? I mean, we.
Oh no, there's no why not. Of course, why not? But
it's fantastic.
Just the same,
It's not crazy.
it is surprising. And since while I was here in faculty, I was going back and forth, and I spent the time in New York, working in the United Nations, in Geneva and in Paris, not in London though. London is not that important. And also,
I'm from London,
but
but
also,
but from the UN point of view, no, it's
also
not.
At Innsbruck, I don't know if you
Innsbruck, yeah.
Innsbruck in the Dominican Republic. This is the United Nations Institute for Training and Research on Women. Now, what I was doing in the Bahrain, well, that's another story. So, all I can say without being pessimistic is very difficult. The best you can do is perhaps try to work in the United Nations and then within go from one department to the other and try to get close to that, or as a lawyer, the way you do it as just by contracts. So that's one way, or become an international civil servant, and then perhaps you will your way into human rights.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked in the human rights department of UNESCO, for example, in Paris. So for a while, but this was by an intermediate as an academic.
Right. So there's lots of different paths, and
but it's
I mean, with the UN, it's like once you get your foot in the door, then you can sort of move around. It's much easier. I mean, it's not easy by any means, but getting your foot in the door in the UN is one of the hardest things to do. I think the JPO program that you mentioned gets 100,000 applications per year. So it's a bit like winning the lottery. So don't rely on it. Go for it, but
and even I mentioned there the roster that I've just managed to get onto now, and that's for P3 level. And so I spoke to somebody in the UN there. I said, well, what happens now? And they said, well, you still need to be kind of networking with people in peacekeeping missions to kind of let people know about you, even though you've got onto this roster. So there's still stuff that you kind of need to do around it anyway.
should we maybe collect a couple of
Let's go through
questions so
questions, yeah.
everybody gets a chance?
Just a quick question. This is nice. So what does your day look like in actual field mission? So what you mentioned you were in Kosovo, like what?
What was I doing?
Is it still like set hours? Do you have your weekends off?
Yeah, it was quite civilized, I can say. I was living within the town that I was in Prizren, so I wasn't in containers as I described there in other peacekeeping missions. I went to the UN office that was there. I was working on minority rights issues, so we would be attending meetings with various stakeholders looking at a particular issue around minority rights. So I remember going to a meeting around transportation for minorities to the enclaves and things like that. So it would be attending those meetings, drafting up notes from the meetings. And then, as I said there, we went one time to northern Mitrovica to look at the situation for Roma Mahala. So it could be all of that. But I had my weekends to myself. I had my evenings to myself. I had a life there. I met people, made friends. So it was a civilized kind of.
So I guess it depends on the security level out there?
Yes, absolutely. Now, you wouldn't get that if you were in a mission in Iraq or Afghanistan. Your freedom of movement would be hugely limited, to the compound, basically, and not beyond. So, but it depends from mission to mission.
Yeah.
Like, what inspired you to pursue a career in human rights?
So kind of going back, I only enjoyed my law degree when I did things like international law and civil liberties, and I think it started off when I volunteered in a prison creche when I was a student, and looking after the kids whilst their family members were seeing the detainees, and from there I just kind of wanted to do that kind of work. And it's been in lots of different kind of iterations and different things, but I think as long ago as when I was a student. Yeah.
I'm wondering if one does decide to go through like the legal route, do you know if employers value professionals who have passed the bar, or rather people who have done a law master's or possibly both? Would you recommend passing the bar?
So qualifying as a lawyer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is simply just
Simply doing a law degree. Well, as I say, I qualified as a lawyer, so I had experience under my belt, and I went straight from doing my articles straight to Geneva to work for the small NGO there, and I think it helped me. The positions that I had I had two positions at the Council of Europe. Again, I think had I not been a qualified lawyer, they wouldn't have been interested in me. So, but as I say, it's just one avenue, and I hope that I've identified other ways into the market. So please don't think that it's a lawyer or nothing, because it's really not. So I just want to kind of emphasise that it's just been my trajectory, but it's not everyone's. So.
I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Like, seeing that Canada would have like the double jurisdictions, I'm wondering if most people you encounter that are lawyers and working for human rights to be generally come from like civil law countries or common law countries.
Actually, when I was at the Council of Europe, when I was doing the work with the judgments of the implementation of the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, I was the only common law lawyer in that department. The rest were all came from civil law jurisdictions. That's just the nature of the beast there. So it's a mix, really. It's a mix.
In my experience, it's a mix.
Yeah.
I think that might be a kind of European, maybe like
I think that's more European than
the civil bias, but.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like there's a diversity around the world, so it will really depend where you choose to work. If you choose to work internationally, let's say in East Africa, where the British had a strong influence, there's more common law. If there's more of a French colonial influence, it's more civil law, so it really depends.
Could you tell us a little bit about what your articling was like?
So that was just in a very, it wasn't really a human rights articling, it was just a small 2-partner firm in London, and I just did, I can't remember now, a bit of employment law, a bit of family law, a bit of criminal, I think. I was suing people who didn't pay their phone bills, so this was fascinating stuff. So, but this was my 2 years as a trainee, but I just did it and I just kind of bit my tongue and got on with it. So it wasn't really human rights per se. So.
And they didn't look at, like, it wasn't important for them when they hired you as an international lawyer if you had done your articling in a relevant.
Because when I moved from there, I went to UN Watch in a sort of, I was a UN Watch fellow there. They didn't really ask a lot about about my time as a trainee, but I evidenced my interest because I had done civil liberties and human rights in my undergraduate degree. I took it as an option. In my third year, I took international law. In my third year, my dissertation was about freedom of expression and the human rights issue. So I think they could see that that's where my kind of interest and passion lay. So somebody at the back.
I think earlier I tried to fit 2 questions into one, so I'm going to sort of maybe rephrase part of my earlier question. So I'm wondering, if you're on a peacekeeping mission, there's desk jobs and there are also, I guess, paramilitary jobs. And so, in the sense, both of them are on the field, but one of them is where, like, I imagine you can carry a weapon, or am I thinking of the wrong thing?
So, I mean, in a peacekeeping mission, the positions for human rights are, there's a human rights officer job, there's a rule of law officer job or judicial affairs. So those are, they will partly be desk-based, but they'll also be out sort of meeting survivors of torture. You'll be sort of meeting other people in NGOs and things like that. So I'm not sure where the paramilitary bit comes in exactly. I'm a bit confused. So that's what when I talk about a peacekeeping mission, I'm talking about positions within the UN in a peacekeeping mission, of which human rights officer role is one. There'll be different sort of strands within a peacekeeping mission. There'll be law, there'll be sort of justice, there'll be prisons and corrections, there'll be police work. So different bits of the mission will be doing different things.
Okay, that's heartening. I didn't want to carry weapons.
No. I mean, those are the blue helmets. If you're thinking about, the blue,
That's what I was
so the
thinking
blue helmets will be, they'll be from all different parts of the world there. They'll be recruited in to do that kind of work. But there'll be people in other bits of the mission doing, as I say, human rights officer roles or judicial affairs officer roles. So, no, you wouldn't necessarily be going and carrying a weapon.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
If there are no more questions, let's thank Vicki again. And as I said, this is a lecture series, so please keep your eyes out for further talks, and they'll be happening throughout this year.